Welcome to today's episode of What to Say and How to Say It. I'm Nina Rosner, and I'm here with Kyle Hargrove, our favorite licensed professional counselor. And today we're going to be talking about step families, three keys to blending without the blades. In other words, how do you do this whole step family thing without chopping each other up? Um, so far, it's been a graphic episode and fairly violent, but it is a thing when you're working with Texans that they're okay with that. So Kyle hails from, I was going to say the land down under. It's almost that. Texas. Yeah, yeah. Home of the Alamo, all the stuff. And you are no stranger to working with couples that are dealing with step family issues. This is a hot topic in our culture today.
It is. And by the way, do you know what's green and red and goes 150 miles an hour?
Not yet.
A frog in a blender.
Okay, thanks. And more on the same. Yeah, dad jokes in honor of Father's Day. All right.
There
So
you go.
this is a thing though, because not all marriages succeed, which is a shame. And and people get remarried and there's usually kids involved, they're in tow. They just go where the parent is, they don't get a say in the whole thing. And there's some stuff that is useful to figuring all of these things out and doing it in a way that is winsome and makes the whole environment for everybody better. So we're going to dig into that today. Before we go there, I want to cue you into our website, greaterimpact.org. There's a marriage assessment tool on there that you can take a look at and some free information, resources, that kind of thing. But Kyle, so three keys to blending without the blades. Now I have a stupid frog in a blender in my head. Thanks. Um,
I am always here to help.
yeah, boy, that's it, it's good that we're not doing this right before dinner. So what do you think is one of the big issues that blended families are facing? Why is this so hard?
Man, parenting is hard. Um, and remarrying is hard. It feels good and it feels natural and it feels easy when it happens, but um, I don't know of very many people that enter into a second marriage that are quite as healthy as they think they are.
Mhm.
And I can absolutely speak to that, not just from my experience as a therapist, but from my experience in real life.
Hmm.
Um, it's a it's it it's a hard thing to do, to take already solidified habits and expectations and different ways of looking at the world and looking at the important parts of what we do in a family, and to put those together and find out how much of it really isn't the same at all.
Mhm.
We find out that our ideas and our ideals sometimes are not matched up. They're not clicking on all cylinders when it comes to actually putting them into application. And I think a lot of people do talk about the things that they find important before they get married. And it's easy to agree in principle, but to find out that when it gets down to brass tacks, that theory, which sounded good months ago when we talked about it on a late night phone call while we were goo goo gaga with each other, is now needing to be applied in reality, and it's not the same at all.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. And I think you run into that whether you're a blended family or not, but then you've got more to talk about, and you probably walk into that thinking, boy, we've talked about some serious stuff and we're on the same page with these things. And then you show up and it's like, how come you're so heavy-handed? And why are you such a pushover? Like, and then you hear somebody say, you're not my dad.
Yeah.
Ouch, and the things start flying.
Well, there are a lot of things like that. Like, what about if one of the parents in the new blended family doesn't have children, hasn't had children?
Oh my, I can't even imagine. Like, what a mess.
It's like, I've never had kids. What do I do now?
Mhm.
And as adults with a few years behind us, we figure, okay, I could just be practical and logical and this will all work out.
Try doing that with a teenager.
Yeah, there's nothing practical or logical
No.
about a teenager, or sometimes even before that case. And then you already mentioned that they're not mine. You think that's a secret? Yeah, because you're thinking that to yourself quietly and say, how do I go about this? They're not mine. Shh, I'm not going to say that out loud. Well, they're going to say it out loud.
Yeah.
You're not my dad. You're not my mom. I don't
Hmm.
have to do what you say. I mean, we all say, well, my kid won't do that, or this kid, this, it won't, it happens. And whether they say it out loud or not, they say it with their actions.
Yeah. Or lack
You know,
of.
yes, yes. And that's where you really start to find out about two people who think they have done all the preparation, uh, is when the children begin playing both ends against the middle, which they're going to do with their natural parents as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there's a whole new layer to that when you
Hmm.
have one person that is your biological parent and one person that's not.
Hmm.
So there's then the I don't want to upset my new spouse scenario,
Mm.
uh, of what if I don't do something the way that she does it, and or what if I don't do something the way he does it, or is accustomed to doing it, or what if I violate tradition
Hmm.
by stepping in when I feel like somebody needs to step in, but I'm the only one to do it.
Hmm.
Um, uh, there's I can give you as an example in my own scenario that's now years and years in the past, but um, I was fairly organized and had pretty high expectations of my boys. Um, my period of time as a single person and a father was pretty calm compared to the time prior to getting married for my wife. She was a single mom of three with full-time custody.
Hmm.
And whereas I used at the time with my boys to build things between the three of us, she used the time with her children to survive.
Hmm.
And survival to someone who's fairly regimented looks like entitlement
Hmm. And chaos.
and chaos. And entitlement and chaos weren't things I was accustomed to, nor were they things that I felt like were okay.
Hmm.
And so when we blended all this together, it was a whirlwind. And there, I'm, I'm sad to say there was some cutting by the blades of the blend.
Mm. Sure.
So we had to learn that nobody gets everything they want, not in life, not at work, not on the playground, and not in the blended family.
Hmm.
Nobody gets everything they want or everything they expect. And, there was a great deal of conversation, there was a great deal of counseling that was necessary in that situation for someone to objectively say, look, you guys are going to have a plan. You can't just wing this. Neither one of you are intelligent enough, as intelligent as you may be, to just do this on the fly. And so there was a lot of give and take, and I don't know, for me, it was an experience that I ended up giving in some ways I'd never given before. And it was humbling. But also, when there are kids involved, who gets the final word? Is it automatic that the biological parent, gets the final word if there's something that we're struggling with? And that's a question that's hard to answer because we also go along with the biblical principles of who's the head of the household.
Hmm.
And if the head of the household and the person that gets the final word aren't the same person, how does that play?
Yeah, you see a lot of conflict around situations like that,
Yeah.
especially in circumstances that involve or affect the other parent. And one of the things that comes to mind for me is getting people where they need to go. And I'm kind of just a very rigid person about that. I always have been, but worked out. Like people only got left behind a couple of times and only had to pay me to bring them lunch like once. And the reason I made that rule in the first place is because I watched several of my friends that were older than I was being run ragged by teenagers who conveniently left things at home, you know? And it's like, okay, the bus is leaving at 7:25. You're in it? Great. You get to go to school. But I'm not going to come back and pick you up and then take you again, and drive the same thing again just because you couldn't roll out of bed on time. This is not my problem. At that point, it's your problem. Take the day, whatever, not my issue. Call your friend, like pay me to drive you. I don't come up with a creative solution. That sounds so, well, Montanan or
Yeah,
Texan, but 20
it
below
does.
zero, 30 below zero without a wind chill. And you already, got the foot of snow off the car. You're not going to go do that again. It's like life is hard. Figure it out. Let's go. Which makes me sound like a terrible parent. But I did read last week that if you allow suffering in your children's lives, they actually grow up into mature adults. So I'm thankful.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. So, but to that point, let's say that I'm that guy or I'm that parent that, and they're my kids, or maybe they're not my kids, mine, right? And the spouse is like disagreeing with how I'm handling this stuff. you know, we didn't have that issue, but they were both of our children, and that was my area of domain. When you look at this in a blended family, though, there's like 1,400 little things now that come into
Right.
just that one situation. I wouldn't even know where to start if my spouse was not in full alignment with me on that.
Yeah, I didn't. I thought I did, but I didn't. I had no clue
Mhm.
where to start. And when you are the one that makes a decision about specific things, and you make it with confidence, and you make it with surety, and then the next thing you know, your new spouse is coming behind you saying, what did you do?
Yeah.
And why? And what? you know my experience was completely different from my new wife's. And for her and her kids, they didn't think it was dinner unless it was handed to them in a bag through a window into their car,
Mm.
because they were forced, into certain ways of doing things that wasn't that familiar to me. So when the first time that we realized nobody had made plans for dinner and we were going to have to fast food it, you know, I say, well, here, I'll go get it. Get them to tell me what they want. Well, one wanted one thing from Taco Bell, one wanted something else from Arby's, and one wanted, oh no, well, I want my sandwich from Arby's, but I want my fries from McDonald's. And I said,
What?
whoa,
Wait.
time out. What is going on here? And so that was just something that had evolved over time
Sure.
to make things easier and more
Yeah.
pleasant.
Yeah, because at
And
that end of the day, you're exhausted and you just want to
yes,
feed them and put them to bed.
yes. So, we had to make some decisions about what was really important and what worked, and what was kind of, things that, okay, maybe that has worked in the past with a smaller group of people, but now that there's seven of us, we got to start thinking differently sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. So give us some coaching on like what are these three keys? Like where do
Okay.
we start with this? Because there's people listening that are in the middle of a tornado with this stuff. We're
Absolutely.
about to step into it and they want to avoid some of the landmines that you guys
Yeah.
you've seen.
Now, don't hate me because of the words I'm going to use here, because they're going to be words you're going to go, oh my gosh, you think I don't know that? But when you hear them put together, I think you may see them a little bit differently. But the first one is, as is in any relationship or any marriage or anything, is communication. And it's not just that you communicate, it's how you communicate. And it's when you communicate. I don't think it would be wise for any family, first generation or blended. It wouldn't be wise for any set of parents to go into a new phase of life with their children as they grow and enter new seasons of life to have not sat down and had conversations about what are we going to do when these things happen, because there's certain lists of whens,
Mhm.
there's lists of maybes, there's list of possibilities, there's list of probables, but there are some things are going to happen as the parent of children. These kids are going to go through, what are we going to do when our kid bites somebody in pre-K? What are we going to
Mhm.
do when they get in a fight? What are we going to do when they're ugly to their sister or their brother? What are we going to do when? And this proactive type of if thens and if whens, this type of communication, I'm going to call it absolutely imperative unless you want to raise your family and live your life in the midst of chaos most all the time.
Mm, that's fair.
you know and to then translate those conversations that you and your spouse have had to the children at the appropriate ages and at the appropriate times when
Mhm.
you see them leaning, moving toward certain things that are on your list,
Mhm.
and you say, look, let's talk about this before there's a problem.
Yeah.
you know
So,
if you do this thing that we're talking about that you're not supposed to do, then this will happen. And that's not a threat, it's a promise.
do you think
Doesn't have to be done with aggression.
it's useful for like the parent whose children that are theirs, right? Came from that family to
Mm-hmm.
say to be the one that says, "Hey, this is how we do things," or do you think it's a unified front thing, conversation, you sit everybody down? Like what does it matter?
Yes, it does matter. Anytime that you follow through with these important things, and even some of the smaller things, where only the parent of those children is the one giving the orders, so to speak, or expressing the expectation, um, it actually creates a divide,
Mhm.
and it tells those children without telling them that my parent, my biological parent, is the one who gives me my marching orders and nobody else.
Gotcha.
Okay, so doing the unified front thing is not only something that needs to happen in the background, it needs to happen in the foreground as well. If there are important conversations that need to take place in the home with the children about behavior, about expectations, about any number of things, the more often that both parents can sit and talk with the children, I'm sorry, together, and nod and affirm and
Mhm.
validate and all the
Mhm.
things, then the more the children are going to see that this is something that they've come to a decision about together,
Yeah.
and we probably need to respect that. Now,
Yeah.
does that mean it's not going to get tested? No. Every kid tests every parent, regardless of the family status. That's just a natural thing. It's going to happen. But once we have understood the need for and taken the time out and the effort to communicate and to be proactive and to talk about what are we going to do together? How are we going to handle these things? We're not the same person. We're not the same parent. We may have, all these ideas may have sounded great, like I said, when we were talking on the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning in different locations. But now that they're actually happening in front of us, there are going to be some things that are going to get kind of contentious.
Mhm.
They're going to say, what? They're going to turn and look at each other and say, we have to be careful about that kind of stuff. But once feel like we have begun, because you're never going to complete it, but begun the cooperation piece, I mean, the communication piece, then we move to the second phase of that, which is cooperation. Once we've communicated, we can begin to cooperate. And that's where I'm talking about the give and the take. Nobody gets everything they want. Everything doesn't happen the way just one person would do it if they were alone. This is not an alone thing. But that cooperation cannot occur in a healthy way unless the communication has already started.
Mhm.
We have to trust each other. We have to look at one another and believe that each wants the best for these children and is looking for the same results when things are all said and done. And we're not going to cooperate in good faith if we don't have that belief. We won't
So,
have that belief unless we've communicated these things together.
can you give an example of what cooperation, or maybe even a definition? Because you think, okay, we talked about this thing, we're in alignment. Isn't that cooperation? It's like, well, no, you got to act on that. But what is it? What is the difference between the communication alignment and the actual acting out of cooperation when it comes to blended family stuff? Like if you've got a blended family situation, how do you cooperate with your spouse when there's some kind of, situation that comes up, like um the kid doesn't clean out the back seat of the car, left all their stuff in there. I'm just making this up, but you know, and it's not your child, but it's your car, right? But you've taken responsibility, you and your spouse have aligned on a thing. Like how do you navigate that with cooperation in mind and the kids just not being useful, not being cooperative, we'll say. Like
Yeah.
they're not helping. What do you do in that
Well,
situation?
that's a general thing. Are we going to be responsible for our things? And it doesn't matter if it's in the car, if it's in the yard, if it's in the garage, if it's in the bedroom, it doesn't matter. Are
Mm,
we going to be responsible for our things, or is that not something that we're going to consider important? So there's the proactive piece in there.
right.
And then even things that we agree on in principle, sometimes one parent is going to think, you know what, right now, that's not really that big of a priority. I'm not going to push it.
Right.
Or the other parent is saying, I thought we agreed that
Mm-hmm.
this is what we would do in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's where some cooperation has to happen. You know, Timing is important. What's going on in the life of that family? How pressurized are things? How high is the stress level? Because if the stress level is running hot, you don't want to get too picky.
Right.
Okay. Let me give you an example. I went into this with two young men. They were 12 and 8. My sons who knew me and knew the expectations I had of them. And that was if I asked them to do something, that meant now.
Yeah.
Or at worst, Dad, this show will be over in 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind if that's fine. You
Yeah.
communicated that with me. Okay.
Yeah.
What they knew I didn't take to really well was to ask for them to do something and then walk out and then come back 5 minutes later and they're still in the same place and the thing didn't get done. So I presumed wrongly that that was the situation in the household with all of the kids, including the ones I had never raised or never been a part of their lives,
Mm-hmm.
except during the courtship time. And so when I would do that and come back and they would still be sitting there doing what they were doing before and not having done it, well, I'll do it in a minute or I'll do it in a few minutes. And man, my Agent Orange was acting up. I I thought the top of my head was gonna blow off. And well, no, you will do it. And I was stomping and stamping and waving my sword and laying down the law. And by God, that's how it was going to happen. Um, how about no?
Yeah, I know,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And so it was our counselor that helped me understand. Look, there's nothing wrong with having been a bit more organized and a bit more consistent and a bit with a little higher expectation of the way that you've raised your children. But you can't walk in there and expect every child from every family to have been raised the same way, and they
Right.
haven't been.
Yeah.
I
Right.
had to lighten up.
Mm.
You know, I didn't feel that what I was asking or expecting of my children was necessarily military, but it sure felt that way to them.
Oh, sure.
So that's the kind of giving and taking that has to happen. Things that you've considered fairly important, they don't have to become unimportant. They just have to have adjustments.
Mhm. And so it might take a little bit longer
Yes,
to facilitate that cooperation with the kids, especially,
right.
but also with your spouse to navigate what you thought was the thing. Like, because my guess is that if you said, okay, well, we're going to ask them to do stuff and they're going to do stuff, and, that's how that'll go. And so everybody's like, yeah, that'll be it. And then, but the finer things of, yeah, when I'm done with my show or in a minute or before I go to bed, like, who hasn't heard a crunchy 11-year-old say stuff like that to you? So,
Yep. And if they're not there, then they'll get there.
yeah.
Yeah. So, but the third thing I want to add that is the creation of the first two things. Without the first two things, without the communication and the cooperation, you can't have consistency. Consistency is only going to happen when there's a plan. It's only going to happen when both parents are a part of that plan and are in agreement with that plan. And that consistency is going to win the day if you absolutely apply it and have the discipline to make the same decisions. I'm not talking about each person make the same decisions. Each person make the same decisions every time a similar situation occurs.
Hmm.
Um, and that can't happen without that we've communicated proactively and that we've done our giving and our taking and are continuing to be pliable where that's concerned. A lot of parents go into this and say, I'm going to be open minded as a parent, but I'm not willing to change my mind.
That doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't, because that's what open minded means. Okay. Open minded doesn't mean I'm willing to listen to what you have to say and nod and wave
Mhm.
and affirm and validate, but I'm not
Mhm.
willing to change my mind because I
Right.
believe what I believe. Okay. That no, open minded means I will listen, I will absorb, I will calculate, I will talk through, plan, whatever, and I'm willing to do something different if if what I hear is plausible. But when we go in with no expectation of changing our mind, we're going to do it our way no matter what.
Mm.
That's not open-minded at all. So we have to be open-minded to be consistent because although the act may be the same, the design may be the same, the circumstances never. And so being consistent when circumstances are different, it's a really hard thing to do. And if you're not intentional about that, then you won't be.
Well, I think it's really hard to even understand that it's an opportunity to be consistent sometimes because children, um, this is going to sound judgmental, and it is, um, they're master manipulators. They're good at doing the least amount of, that they have to, and they want what they want, and they're pretty interesting about how they go about getting it. So paying attention to what it is you're dealing with right now is probably the same thing as what you were dealing with yesterday, but you don't know it because it looks different and the excuses and all of that kind of stuff sound different, but they're really not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One of the questions I had, you know, you, it seems like, with your example, the fast food thing, for one parent, that seems perfectly reasonable, like no joke. And for them in the circumstance they're in, it is, right? But in another situation, it's just not feasible. And then you do the math on that and you got 7 different restaurants and then people are out and everybody's fried or cold by the time you get home. So, when you look at the requests that one person has and we're quick to judge them as reasonable or unreasonable, you know, we I think that would be really difficult. Like, how do you manage your own history and expectations of your own self? Like, what do you do internally to be open-minded, to be receptive, in that situation? Like, what are some of the conversations you have with yourself around some of what might get very easily and understandably labeled as unreasonable as you're interacting in that stuff?
Probably, I'm a fan of reverse engineering, and reverse engineering a problem. It's easy to ask somebody, well, how do you keep this problem from happening? Well, let's go to the back end of the problem and let's see what the results are and the consequences are,
Mhm.
you know, and let's say to ourselves, how bad is that? When you compare this consequence to another consequence, how bad is it and how important is it really?
Mhm.
So when we do that, sometimes we come up with, a plan of prioritization.
Mhm.
So I have to say, is what I feel passionate about right now really that big of a priority in the scheme of things? Is it worth my getting my pants in a wad? Right now, is what's going to happen if I don't get involved with this situation and just let it go? How
Mhm.
bad is that? you know, is that going to feed a problem that's already there? Or is it just going to be a one-off that happens and then you just go along your merry way?
Right.
So sometimes you have to be willing to step in it, so to speak. That's what we say down here in Texas. You know, Usually you try to step around it, but sometimes you step in it. Sometimes you have to step in it on purpose. And it smells either way.
True.
But I hope that's an appropriate answer to the question. Is that you have to be the adult in the room, the adults in the room.
Yeah. I would
And you
think
have
that,
to be able to think things through several other layers that kids aren't going to think through, and that people who are flying by the seat of their pants aren't going to think through. What's the ultimate impact of this behavior if I don't like it, but just decide to say, not worth it at this point?
right.
So maybe I don't discipline a child, but I have a conversation instead.
Hmm.
And discipline should come with a conversation, but the conversation doesn't involve consequences,
Right.
disciplinary consequences. Maybe I end up changing the way I handle things in general because of these opportunities that I'm having. Um, because I see some things in myself that, as a parent, that nothing wrong with them, but maybe there are ways of going about doing these things that work better. And I'm seeing that because I've agreed to cooperate.
Mm-hmm.
I've agreed to give here and there. But you can't know when and where to cooperate when you haven't had that proactive communication and be willing to have more.
This sounds like even more work than non-blended families, the traditional, like that's what I have. And that was just a rodeo and it was really
Yeah.
hard. Great, but hard.
Yeah.
It's not easy to raise kids. I can't even imagine blending a family together. And I know people that do it. I have tons of people in my life that have done this, and it's a struggle. It's a real struggle, and those people need support and lots of grace, tons of
Yeah.
grace.
I would say outside of infidelity or mental illness or, some of the things like that parenting someone else's children is the greatest challenge in a blended family,
Mm,
hands down. It's the one that will show itself, rear its head, call it what you want, more frequently, more often, and more intensely than just about anything else.
gotcha. Well, that makes sense. It's just extra space for more conflict.
Yeah.
Lots of
I,
it.
if I can leave a last word, the thing I just want to recommend and hope that everybody will listen to and uh, take account for. I think you have to ask God for a lot of grace,
Hmm.
because I'm not sure any of us have it just within ourselves to get in there and do this and do it well, do it lovingly, do it right, do it consistently without a lot of grace. because still a lot of emotion is involved in a lot of this, and when that's the case, not as often as not, I think decisions and choices made with emotion end up being decisions and choices that we later regret.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth most of the time?
Yeah.
Fair. Fair enough. Yeah. So yeah, I feel like I've just really discouraged everybody with my statement about how
It sounds
this is
bleak, doesn't it?
awful. Okay. Yeah. So you've done this. Give people some hope around this.
Yeah.
It's not all bad.
It's not. It's not. I'm so glad that you turned it that way, because I was feeling kind of getting kind
I
of
know,
cloudy
like,
here, even though the sun's out. Yeah.
I'm done.
Uh, Man, so many opportunities to learn, so
Mm,
many opportunities to laugh and to enjoy watching children grow, to learn to love children that aren't your blood. That's not always an easy thing to do. Um, but again, I think that the talking, not just with your spouse, but with the whole family, with the kids, taking time to get to know them, walking in to a new marriage and laying down the law is not going to work.
mm. That's good advice right there, Kyle.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I heard about it. Okay. Um, spending the time necessary, to involve everybody in the process, I think builds a lot of positive things, and it builds bonds, and it builds trust, and it shows kids that uh, you are about loving them and caring for them and providing for them and being there when they need somebody, because the other parent, whether they're involved in the kids' lives or not, are not always present
Mhm.
when the need arises.
Yeah.
So I think that the concept of commanding respect instead of demanding respect is what comes to my mind.
Mhm.
We command respect by showing character
Yes.
and by, being consistent with that and not changing it because the circumstances are different, unless it's absolutely necessary.
Mhm.
And it's not an easy ask, to come into another family and get the respect that maybe you had in different situations before.
Mhm.
And so how you go about that is really critical.
I would think that this would be an opportunity to deepen your faith and your relationship with the Lord um, exponentially. And a very powerful experience if you're leaning on Him, and then the right outcome then becomes the kids see His character through our behavior. I mean, that's always what we want as parents, but probably
Yeah,
harder.
that's
And
that's a huge truth, that it's going to get deepened, because you're going to get frustrated and come to a place where you're saying, I don't know what else to do. I don't.
Mhm.
I'm 32 years in working with families, and when it's my family, it's like I work at a car wash.
Nah.
Okay, like I'm the guy that changes your oil. Okay, I'm not a therapist at all.
Yeah,
Literally none of it matters, because why? Because now it's my emotion that's involved.
right. Yep.
And you also have to remember, and I can't believe I didn't bring this up earlier, but you're dealing with wounded children.
Mm. Yes.
And the closer the time frame is to when that divorce happened, and whatever happened, or maybe it wasn't a divorce, maybe a parent was uh, lost at sea or in a
Mhm.
car accident or something.
Yeah.
There are wounds that are still there and still open,
Yep.
and you may uh, freshen those wounds without intending to or realizing that you have.
Mhm.
And so that's why I think this needs to be taken nice and smoothly and slowly, and then with a calculated, proactive plan.
That's really wise. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And both spouses can be still recovering from some things too, depending on what the circumstances are. There's lots of opportunity to learn to love in those situations. And I've seen some blended families that really figure this out, and oh boy, those bonds are strong. So thanks for walking around in this topic today. We've had people ask, do you have anything for blended families? And now we do. So thank you for sharing your wisdom on this. I know you've been working with them for a while and you have your own experience there, Kyle. So thank you for bringing that. Want to
As
reach
always,
out.
absolute pleasure.
If you're wanting to reach out and you live in Texas, how do we reach you?
Just holler real loud.
Okay.
Sound goes across the prairies out here, But no, you can reach me via email at my super secret email address, Kyle Hargrove, LPC at gmail.com. If you'd like to check into the platforms in which I work virtually with clients, please first go to helloalma.com, or you can check out headway.co. I will be there in the stable of therapists that each one of those platforms have. And feel free to check out information or email me if you have further questions.
Thanks for stopping by today, everybody. And if you live in Texas, you know who your therapist is now. And we'll be seeing you in the next episode. Please check it out. It's good. It's all about conflict and how to deepen your relationship with God, yourself, and others. We'll see you in the next episode.